Vikings' first, and probably not last, spin-off series Vikings Valhalla is finally out on Netflix. And I gave the first episode a squiz. I gave it a cheeky little watch. And it's everything you want to see in a spin-off series, is you want them to remind you of the series that you loved, Vikings, or at least watched. Vikings, and you want to be reminded of how good that show was. And that's pretty much all this show does. Remember Ragnar Lothbrok, the amazing, spectacular character that literally held a show up on his shoulders? He held the weight of Vikings for 4 seasons. He made that show what it was. He made it enjoyable. He made it fantastic at times. And this show really reminds me of the back half of Vikings, but without the goodwill that Vikings had done it, in that a lot of characters are like, "Oh, Ragnar, I'm honoured and humbled to be in the presence of sitting where Ragnar Lothbrok sat." But 100 years later. So his sons aren't in it. Other characters that I care about aren't in it. Lagertha's not in it. And it's just a lot of men with beards that put my beard to shame. Men with longer, disgusting, dirtier hair than me. About 10 characters are introduced in this first episode. What are any of their names? Who knows? There's handsome, pretty boy Viking man who is kind of our lead, but also it's kind of hard to tell who's our lead. And when I say pretty boy, I'm not talking like you see bloody Ragnar Lothbrok in that first episode and you're like, oh, that man's a male model. You know he is. You don't know, but you know. And he is. He's sexy as hell, charismatic, amazing. This show has someone who looks like budget reject. That guy who was the main character in Black Sails. That guy. Get pictures up, compare yourself. You'll see what I mean. Got a disgusting beard. He's meant to be charming and sexy. He's fine. He's nothing. His sister, I think it's his sister. Honestly, too many characters to remember. But everyone's got a beard. Everyone's waving about a big broadsword and an axe. It's convoluted. It's too much. There's so much going on in this episode, but it feels like nothing really happens until the last 5-10 minutes when it finally kind of gets going. Where you're like, okay, I can see the idea of what they're going to play with here, with the Vikings have all banded together, to go fight England again because of a cheeky little red wedding cold opening that happened. And then they're all like, I'm Christian. I'm a Christian Viking now. An interesting concept. But, the idea of Christian Vikings and then the pagan Vikings and they're all sparring off inside. It's just, there was so much groundwork done in the original Viking series. And I'm going to have to compare. I'm going to compare and contrast. It's the spin-off series. What do you expect me to do? It just feels like in that show, we got a couple of characters, Ragnar, Floki, his brother, and we just kind of I don't know, we had time to kind of sit with the characters, learn who they are, experience the universe and the world, and then it slowly expanded. Season 2, England, this, that. And of course, it can't be season 2 already. This show has to build off the idea of the 6 seasons of Vikings, but this episode has giant armies of people, giant big gatherings, there's big words being spoken about going to England and doing this and that, and there's a lot going on. But I don't care or feel anything for any of the characters that are embarking or doing any of these things and embarking on these great big missions that are set out and everything. And so I'm left wondering, maybe they should have really reined it back in, started a little bit smaller, and let us learn who these characters are, and then maybe at the end of the first season, get to this point where they're all going off to England. The way the Vikings starts off small, it starts off with little scenes, character moments. We still get a couple of little scraps, little fights. Terrible. Just uninspired, very by the numbers. Seen it before in Vikings, seen it before better on Thrones, and just every show, Last Kingdom, whatever. You name a show with men with swords and beards. They have fighting that's as good, if not better, than this episode. Nothing in this episode really made me go, oh, I see what you guys are doing. I see what you're doing, and it's amazing. This really just felt like a cash grab. The way that the opening titles were just remember Ragnar Lothbrok, bloody remember the best character in our old show. Well, these characters also remember him. Great. Fantastic. Now, don't get me wrong. This show isn't atrocious. It's not like a giant pile of shit on the legacy that is Vikings. A show that, at its best, was a pale comparison to Game of Thrones. It was always 6 months behind what Game of Thrones were doing. When Game of Thrones had two giant, literal, actual big giants, and a mammoth pulling down a wall, trying to get at a gate with a giant wall in a big battle. 6 months later, we had a Vikings episode where there was a tall man and a horse trying to bring down a gate at Paris. You know, and I feel like you could say that for pretty much every season. The Battle of Bastards happened, lots of men fighting swords in the mud, but spectacular and the best thing you'll ever see. And then Vikings were like, oh, we'll just have 100 men and one man and a horse in some mud. Because Battle of Bastards had mud. And it really felt like that a lot of the time. As soon as Ragnar Lothbrok wasn't a main on the show anymore, it lost all, like, the zest that the show had. He really just carried that show on his shoulders. He was spectacular. The character's amazing. He's great in everything, really. He's even good in Warhammer. Warcraft? Warcraft. Oh, I'll cut that. I won't. I have no time to cut it. I've got to watch 7 more episodes of Vikings Valhalla. Will it get better? It definitely won't. But maybe it will. So I'm gonna stick with it. So I do suggest that people who love Vikings, you're gonna enjoy this on the level of seeing men with beards and big axes doing Viking stuff. They're all like, I'm a Viking, I've got Viking blood, and they're doing speeches and they're all sitting around tables drinking, and it's got Viking-esque, stuff going on, but none of the characters, like, straight away, I want to see a character pop out at me that makes me go, I like that guy's vibe. Maybe one guy, maybe the guy who did the speech about the blood and raw Vikings, maybe. But I just feel like he's kind of like the sexiest and most charming. But that doesn't make him sexy or charming. It just makes him the most sexy or charming. Which, I don't know. I feel like that says a lot. Like, a lot of this just felt like really pale imitations of what Vikings was. I'm not the biggest fan of Vikings, as you can tell from what I've said so far. But I did watch all of it. I liked a lot of it. I liked some of it to a lot of it. I really liked the early stuff. I really liked season 2, 3, 4-ish around there. And kind of, like, a few of the last episodes were kind of interesting. But the show was always kind of, it wasn't as good as it could be. It wasn't as good as I hoped. And this show is another step below, unfortunately. It feels very a pale comparison to what that show once was. It doesn't have any of Viking's sons, who are all spectacularly cast, and at their best were amazing, and at their worst were good enough, And this show just feels like everything's kind of good enough at this point. It's just the pilot. But honestly, I think from a great show, you should be able to tell where they're going for the pilot. Also, Netflix, each first season is kind of a pilot, so I am going to give it more of a go. But at this stage, in terms of like, is this for the glory of Valhalla? Or is this more like, not for the glory of Valhalla? That was bad. But yeah, I'd love to know what everyone else thinks. Is everyone like, big yays for Viking Valhalla? Spin-off is better than Vikings. I mean, you don't exist. That person that I just described does not exist. I wonder though, do you think this is good enough? Are you kind of excited by ideas? I mean, the idea of the Christian pagan Viking civil war kind of Viking situation is kind of interesting. I just think that they could have handled it a lot better. The opening scene where it's like a big red wedding of all the Vikings in England, that kind of could have been the whole first episode. You like trick us into thinking these are all the main characters, establish them, develop them, and then they all die horrifically and brutally. At least for like, do a 15-minute scene or even the first episode. And I think that would have really hit home with the kind of shocking, horrific nature of that. And that kind of sets up the inciting incident that is the show. Whereas what it is just a cold opening where it's like, we're all at dinner and we're having fun and I'm going to exterminate you all. Ha ha! And then they all get red weddinged and it's like, what? Who cares? Who cares? Then there's titles on the screen and they all fade away and it just says like, for revenge. It's like, oh, that's cool. Oh. Thanks for watching, guys. Like, subscribe, comment, hit the notification bell, all the things. But yeah, I'd love to know what everyone thinks. Comment below and I'll hopefully have another review for other episodes of the finale, or who knows? Who knows how far I'm going to get? Who knows?